Hello everyone, and welcome to the Hockey Oven. So today we're going to be doing another off-season team preview, and we're looking at the Pittsburgh Penguins. Now the Pittsburgh Penguins have been probably the best team of the last decade, up there with Chicago, but it's starting to look like things might be changing in the Steel City. I'm not a big fan of some of the off-season moves they've made, but we'll get into that later. We're going to be looking at this the same way we're doing the other team previews, so if you haven't checked out those videos, I suggest you do so. But we're going to start off with their additions. Now, I'm not necessarily a big fan of the additions that the Pittsburgh Penguins made. I do think they did add a good few players, but there's some that I don't know if they're necessarily going to fit well in Pittsburgh. But starting off with their biggest addition, I have Kasperi Kapanen. Now, I do think Kapanen will probably fit in well in Pittsburgh. It's already been confirmed that he's going to play on Crosby's wing, so that's definitely going to boost his stat totals. I do think Kapanen is a good player that kind of got sheltered a bit in Toronto. Didn't necessarily see the minutes he maybe deserved. Kapanen, he can be a divisive player. He struggles with consistency, and I think that's part of the reason that drove him out of Toronto. He does make some poor choices sometimes, but overall he's a solid player. I don't know if he's a top liner though, but playing with Crosby will probably enhance his game. They also added Mike Matheson, which I'm not a fan of this move. Mike Matheson is not that good, to be honest, and he's getting paid a lot. He's getting paid over $4 million, and in my opinion, he's probably a bottom-pairing defenseman. I don't think he's going to bring a lot to Pittsburgh. I mean, I could be wrong. It could be a great fit for him. But right now, I just don't see Matheson bringing a lot to the Pittsburgh Penguins, especially for that contract. They also brought in Mark Jankowski, which I do like this signing as a depth move. Jankowski is a solid fourth liner. Not much more than that at this point, but, you know, Pittsburgh needs these depth guys since their star players tend to get injured a lot, so that's a good depth signing for them. They also signed Cody Ceci, which, that's brutal. Ceci is one of the worst defensemen in the NHL, in my opinion. He's a turnover machine. There's about no offense there, and in general, doesn't provide much at all. Thankfully, it's only a one-year deal and a, low cap hit, but still, for that 1 year, CC isn't going to bring much to Pittsburgh. They also got Colton Sevier, which he's once again just a fourth line guy, not going to provide much. So the real crown jewel of the offseason is Kasperi Kapanen, and the rest of the guys, I don't know how I feel about. I like Jankowski, but the other additions, especially on the defensive side of things, I don't think is necessarily going to be an improvement, especially when you look at what they lost. Now, Pittsburgh actually lost a lot of players this offseason, and when I did my research for this video and looked over what they actually gained and lost, it kind of just sticks out how brutal of an offseason Pittsburgh really had. They lost Matt Murray, Patrick Hornquist, Justin Schultz, Patrick Marleau. I mean, the list goes on. But to start off with Matt Murray, Tristan Jarry has taken over the starter job and right now is arguably the better goalie, but I still think Matt Murray has a lot of potential and I think could potentially bounce back in Ottawa. Murray got Pittsburgh to those 2 Stanley Cups and was very impressive in that run. I truly think Penguins fans were way too hard on him, and we've seen that, in interviews he said he'll have Pittsburgh fans walk up to him in the streets and say how bad he is. The city treated him like trash, and to be honest, I was kind of happy for Murray when he got traded. Hopefully Ottawa fans are a bit nicer to him. Losing Patrick Hornquist and only getting Mike Matheson and Colton Sevier back is just a brutal trade for GMJR. Hornquist was a real key guy for them, obviously declining a bit, but still an effective player and still a very clutch player. He scored big goals. I believe he had the Cup winner in 2017. So Matheson, is a key guy in that locker room, and clearly the locker room didn't take very well to him leaving. Losing Justin Schultz I don't think is a big deal. He kind of expired in Pittsburgh, I guess you could say. In those last couple of years, he really wasn't good anymore, and I think Washington actually overpaid for him in free agency. I really didn't think he was going to get $4 million, especially with a bit of term. So I don't think Schultz is a big loss. I do think they have better defensemen in the wings to replace him. But still, it is a loss. And then Patrick Marleau, once again, not a big loss. He was a trade deadline pickup, only played a handful of games for them. But, it's a locker room presence that might be missed. And then there's Connor Sheary, which Connor Sheary could still potentially return to the Pittsburgh Penguins. He is still an unrestricted free agent, but it doesn't look very likely right now, as Pittsburgh kind of looks like they're complacent with their offseason moves. Sheary is a solid third or second liner. He has played on Crosby's wing in the past, and that has helped boost his stat totals, as most players playing on Crosby's wing. So that's just them losing more depth. They also lost Dominic Simone, which they kind of replaced with Mark Jankowski, and I think that's a saw-off. They're both similar players. Simone was a bit, they're both kind of snake-bitten when it comes to goal scoring, but both are fourth-line guys, so, you know, Simone for Jankowski, especially since Simone did end up signing in Calgary. I don't think either teams are really complaining there. But they lost Jack Johnson, which buying out Jack Johnson is an addition by subtraction. Jack Johnson, I think, is probably the worst player in the NHL. He's absolutely brutal. He provides nothing, no offense, no defense. He takes bad penalties. And I don't just want to rip on a player. He does seem like a nice guy, but unfortunately you don't get paid in this league for being a nice guy. Yeah, so losing Jack Johnson, I think Pittsburgh fans are pretty happy about, at least from what I've seen. It's going to, you know, create less of a headache for fans watching the game, since thankfully they're not going to have to see Jack Johnson in a Pens uniform. Now going into their top six, Pittsburgh's top six is still really good, highlighted by that top line. Getzel is a very underrated emerging star. Then you've got Crosby, and Kapanen is good to play on that right wing, like has been stated. Then on the second line, you've got Zucker, Malkin, and probably, I would imagine, Brian Rust. So that's a really solid top six. You got some good two-way players there, but the offensive potential. I mean, Malkin is still a really good player. We have been seeing a bit of a decline with him lately in his overall play, but his offensive presence is still there, and I still think we could see a big season from Malkin. Crosby did have a bit of a down year last year, and I'm starting to wonder, you know, maybe is this the end of Crosby's absolute dominance? I still think he's going to be a great player for a long time, but maybe not necessarily a top 3 player. I do think Crosby can bounce back a little bit, though. I mean, he always has when he's had a down year. He's a generational talent and one of the hardest working players in the league. So overall, I really like their top 6. I don't know if Kasperi Kapanen is necessarily going to be a star player for them, but I think they've got enough star players in Pittsburgh that he doesn't necessarily need to be a massive point scorer. As long as he can just fit in well and gel on that line, I think Pittsburgh will be pretty happy with that. Maybe not for what they gave up, but regardless. But going into the top 4. Now, I do like some pieces in Pittsburgh's top 4, but it's kind of questionable because some of these guys are very up and down or get injured a lot. So the top pairing of Brian Dumoulin and Chris Letang is actually very solid and very underrated. Dumoulin is one of the best shutdown defensemen in the NHL and simply doesn't get talked about enough. The problem with Dumoulin is that he gets injured so often. So one has to wonder, you know, with all this mileage on his body, is it going to start affecting his game? How much longer does he have to play? But if he can stay healthy, he's one of the most effective shutdown defensemen in the NHL, and I know Pittsburgh fans are really big on him. Then there's their star defenseman, Chris Letang, and, you know, health has kind of been an issue with Letang as well, but when he's healthy, he is a premier offensive defenseman. Definitely a great defenseman. I really like Chris Letang. His overall game is very solid. So when he plays, he's great, but it's a matter of keeping him in the lineup. Then on that right side, you've got the youngster John Marino. John Marino really showed a lot in his rookie season. I was very impressed with his defensive play. He did have a little bit of offense to go with it, putting up, I believe, 26 points. Nothing, you know, no star power, but Marino is a strong defensive presence, and I do think is part of that nice future for Pittsburgh. They are gonna, in my opinion, I think Pittsburgh is in for a bit of a rebuild eventually, but I think Marino is a guy you want to keep around, because if Pittsburgh ends up being a, you know, true cup contender in 5 years, I think Marino can be a very solid piece, kind of like what Brian Dumoulin has been. So Marino is really good. And then on that left side, I'm not quite sure who's going to fit in there, but I think Marcus Pettersson is probably the second pairing guy. I like Marcus Pettersson. I think he's a solid defenseman, but he definitely did have his struggles this past season. We saw that against Montreal in the play-in round. But I think Marcus Pettersson can bounce back. He is a solid defenseman, no star, but, you know, for a second pairing guy, I think he's all right. But moving on to their goaltending. Now, their goaltending is kind of in question as far as the backup spot goes. I think it's going to go to Casey DeSmith, and I think most people think that as well. In that case, DeSmith is a solid backup, and I think can provide them with some decent starts. But then their starter is Tristan Jarry. Now, Tristan Jarry is interesting, because he had this one great year. He was an all-star, and basically now he's been handed the keys to the starting role. Can he keep up with that? Maybe. Hopefully. I do like Tristan Jarry. But I don't know if all this pressure on Pittsburgh and how they've treated their goaltenders is, it might weigh on him. It might affect his game. At least he did have a support net with Murray the past couple seasons, but now with DeSmith being the backup, Jarry is the bona fide starter. So hopefully Tristan Jarry can perform well. Now going into their best players. Now their best players are still some of the best players in the world with Crosby, Malkin, Letang, Getzel, and Rust. That top three alone, the three-headed monster of Crosby, Malkin, and Letang has been arguably the best core with Chicago for the past decade. Those three guys, although they're aging, are still fantastic and still have that cup pedigree in them, but I don't know if necessarily the depth around Pittsburgh is good enough. And I just think there's something stale in that locker room at this point. I don't think it's necessarily head coach Mike Sullivan. I do think Mike Sullivan is a really good coach, but it feels like that team's just been together a while, and you tend to see this with teams nowadays. We saw it with Chicago, that eventually, you just need a change. So I don't know who that change would be if, Pittsburgh was looking at trading a core guy. There was rumors about Letang, and I believe Letang even stated that he doesn't expect to be a Pittsburgh Penguin in the next, 3 years or something. But their top five is still really good, a very strong core. But moving into players that I think should be talked about. Now the first player I want to talk about is Evgeny Malkin, actually. Now Malkin has kind of been up and down the last few years, and one has to wonder if he could potentially be a guy they might look at trading. Now Malkin is getting older, I believe he's 34. He still is a dominant offensive presence when he's healthy, but like a lot of Pittsburgh players, health is the question with Malkin. I'm not sure if he could stay healthy over a full schedule, and it could lead to trade rumors, and if Pittsburgh isn't performing, he could be a guy they look at trading. I think they would rather trade Malkin than Crosby, since Crosby, face of the franchise and everything, the captain. But Malkin is definitely a core piece and a for sure Hall of Famer as well, and Pittsburgh is definitely going to retire his number. It would be weird seeing Malkin in a different uniform. But another player I want to talk about is John Marino once again. Now I'm wondering if, maybe this was just, not beginner's luck, but can Marino follow up that great rookie season he had? If he can't, then that really hurts Pittsburgh's blue line. If Marino struggles, then they really don't have a set second pair right-hand defenseman, and they're going to be scrambling and maybe having to place a guy like Cody Ceci in that role where he definitely doesn't belong. I do like Marino, but he just needs to stay consistent and perform like he did in his rookie year. And then I want to talk about Kasperi Kapanen. Now Kasperi Kapanen he's got a lot of pressure on him to perform after being brought in from Toronto. They paid a high price to get him. He knows he's going to play on Crosby's wing, and I wonder how that's going to affect his game. Kapanen is a very fast player, and as Crosby gets older, he's starting to lose his wheels, so hopefully that can complement Crosby's game. But there is some attitude issues with Kapanen, and I'm wondering if that's, not going to necessarily help their locker room situation, because there has been reports of, the locker room's been kind of restless, especially after that Patrick Hornquist trade. So I think Kapanen really needs to fit in well with Pittsburgh. If he has a down year off the start, I could see Pittsburgh giving up on him right away, because they tend to do that with players. Pittsburgh seems like a very impatient team right now, so they're going to need Kapanen to perform right away. But as far as the category I would put Pittsburgh in, I would actually say that they're a bubble team at this point. Now, I don't know why. I just have this feeling with Pittsburgh that they're going to fall back a bit. I think, and a bubble team still means that, they could still very well make the playoffs, but I don't see them as a contender or a favorite anymore, like for the Stanley Cup. I don't think that they are, a team like Colorado that, oh yeah, you could definitely see them taking on the Stanley Cup next year. Or even a team like Philadelphia. I think Philadelphia is a contender, and I think Pittsburgh is a step behind. They are getting older. We have seen some decline from players, and even Crosby, after they got beat out by Montreal, said, maybe it's time for a rebuild. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Pittsburgh. It's hard to bet against Pittsburgh and Crosby, because whenever anybody says, oh, well, they might take a step back, they normally have a really good regular season and maybe go on a bit of a playoff run, but they have lost 9 of their last 10 playoff games. So it wouldn't surprise me if Pittsburgh still had a good regular season and then lost in the first round again of the playoffs. Especially with these new divisions, Pittsburgh might have a bit easier of a division to play in, which in that case, I think that they definitely could still make the playoffs, but probably a first round exit again. If it's regular divisions and they have to play in the Metro, I just think there's so many teams in the Metro that are actually better than Pittsburgh. So this could finally be the year that Pittsburgh falls out of the playoffs, and it would be a bad year for them to do so since they don't have their first round draft pick. So for Penguins fans, they might need to brace themselves, but I would say still have confidence in your team as long as you've got Crosby, Malkin, and Letang. It's still one of the best cores in the league, and they can still take the team on a run, but only time's going to tell. Maybe they regress, or maybe they have another great year. But that does it for today's video. I appreciate you guys watching till the end. Please leave a like, comment, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you guys later. Bye for now.